a very warm welcome to you. The floor is all yours, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Nivedita, Amrita, colleagues, and young students for giving me an opportunity to meet all of you and to interact with you. At a very difficult time, and pandemic is back once again, and with rising numbers and cases and resultant fear and anxiety. When this morning we meet, even this online meeting is very therapeutic, at least for me, getting an opportunity to meet all of you and to get an opportunity to interact with young minds. So I often tell myself that it's like finding flowers in a desert, and that's why I value a gathering of this kind immensely and meaningfully. And you have asked me to initiate a conversation with young minds, particularly on the pandemic and the kind of questions we are raising, the anxiety, the fear, the uncertainty that we are passing through, and the quest for certain kind of meaningful living, even at this difficult hour, at this difficult time. And when we think that we should initiate a discussion on a theme of this kind, I think one thing that immediately comes to our mind is that, and which is very important, and that is what I wish to young minds to understand, that we are talking about something which is beyond the official curriculum, which is beyond the syllabus. It is not something that as students of sociology honors course you read, or this is part of your reading list. And why I emphasize on that particularly at the time of difficulties and the time of crisis in our life, we do realize that there are limits to what colleges, universities, and schools regard as official knowledge, which is codified in legitimate textbooks and the reading list, and which is being perpetuated through the ritualization of examinations and the getting degrees and certificates. Very meaningful learning takes place outside the official curriculum and outside the official syllabus. And that's why at this crucial juncture, a lot of our learning and unlearning is taking place, which is beyond the curriculum and beyond the syllabus. And to grow as a responsible learner, a learner with curiosity, with eyes open, is to constantly, to learn and unlearn, and to learn a lot of things from what is not there in the syllabus, what is not part of the official curriculum. So that, I believe, is something we are going to do today on the pandemic and our quest for the meaning of existence. Now, before I come to a theme of this kind, let me make two quick points, which I believe are very important before we enter the theme. First point that I wish to emphasize on is the need for reflexivity in life. And I urge young students to think of it. And when I talk about reflexivity and I want you to reflect on reflexivity, it is essentially to realize and to tell ourselves again and again that when we grow up, when we learn, when we educate ourselves, it is not just about reading the book that exists there, reading the book that is there in the library, reading the book that is in the syllabus. One important book that has to be constantly read, explored, discovered is the book that you are, yourself. So self is a very, very important component of learning. In the name of returning a distance between the knower and the known, between objectivity and subjectivity, between science and poetry, you should not abandon the practice of reading the self. So the more you know the world out there, the more you would feel inspired to know your inner journey, to know the self. These are not contradictory. In other words, it is through a nuanced practice of reflexivity that you succeed in building a bridge between the self and the world, between the book that you are and the book that you are reading in the library, in the syllabus. So the process of inner churning, the inner quest, the churning of the self in the process of learning is absolutely important. Today's discussion acquires a lot of meaning. You and I will talk, discuss, communicate about us, our fear, our anxiety, our phobia, our uncertainty, all those things which were coming at this moment. So reflexivity is very, very important part of learning. So that is the first point that I will want you to see. And the second, I believe, which philosopher Martin Buber was fond of saying, is that at a final moment of peak, our educational experience ought to be an act of communion. And the communion is possible that when you and I are willing to acknowledge the living presence of each other. That you as a student are not merely an objectified abstract entity, to be graded, to be objectified, and to be seen only in terms of attendance register. Or me as a teacher is not just an objectified entity who would just grade and evaluate you and just complete the official syllabus. You and I are living present. You and I are living souls, constantly engaged in an act of conversation, act of communion with each other. So meaningful teaching is not about I-it relationships. Meaningful teaching is about I-thou relationship. A relationship between two living consciousness, between two living subjects, and willingness to acknowledge the presence of each other. And only when this communion takes place, then the walls of separations are broken, and then we begin to talk, we begin to communicate, we begin to understand one another. And at the time of the pandemic, we felt this need time and again that we ought to be listened to, we ought to be talked to, and acceptance of the presence, living presence of you and me, that we all felt so deeply at that moment. So our learning is about reflexivity and also about communion and art of listening to one another. So I think that once we begin to value these two things, the reflexivity as part of our learning experience and the communion and the art of listening as part of our learning experience, then it would become easier for us to enter into the centrality of the theme on the pandemic and the questions we are raising and the meaning of existence. That just before I come to pandemic and the question of the meaning of existence, let me take you to one of the important things which we have read during our childhood, that Siddhartha, because his father was a great king, and the father thought that Siddhartha should not see anything which is painful in life, which is miserable in life. He should be protected from all that is negative, all that is painful. But life doesn't go on like that. And then, as we read during our childhood Siddhartha's life, eventually he saw old age, he saw sick body, and he saw death. So he saw old age, frail bodies are breaking down. He saw people with severe illness and sickness, and he eventually saw death. And when he saw all that, then eventually what happened to him, that you and I know, that taken for granted world, his father wanted him to believe that, which Americans are fond of saying and writing all those bestseller books, you are okay, I am okay, or life is a picnic party. Suddenly Siddhartha saw that it is not a picnic party. It is not just about you are okay, I am okay. There is death, there is old age, there is sickness. And this encounter with that led to a process of inner charming. If everything is temporal, if this body is temporal, if this body is bound to die and decay, if sickness and death are awaiting us, then what is the meaning of existence? Why do we live? If there is so much attachment to things which are eventually temporal, then how do we live? Does it cause pain and suffering? Now, is there a way out of this pain and suffering? And then those questions bothered Siddhartha. And then the Siddhartha's inner quest and the journey began. And we know that out of that prolonged quest and the prolonged journey, we thought that what ultimately Siddhartha became a Buddha and spoke about, began to see life in a completely different way, And this is where the notion of Nirvana, the notion of his teaching became important. Why I gave this illustration? I gave this illustration. What happened in the biography of Siddhartha at a personal life, that death, old age, sickness made him confront a lot of questions. The questions which his father wanted him to avoid, not to see. But eventually he saw it, and these new questions came. So at a moment of personal encounter with the difficulties of life, that led to a process of inner churning and certain kind of request. Now just ask yourself that what does it happen if in the eyes of a larger collective and the society, the difficult questions suddenly come, very difficult questions. And pandemic, brought about those questions. And as a result, the larger society and you and I as part of that society confronted those questions. The way Siddhartha at one time confronted certain kind of questions. So what are those questions that for last 1.5 years, that came to us, and which we were confronting? We realized that last year, when it came, and slowly the time of lockdown, and the rising number of infections and the death and the statistics of death. Now, one thing that we all realized, the familiar world, the world that was known to us, the taken for granted world that is crumbling, that is collapsing. The world no longer looks same. So the known world, the familiar world, taken for granted world crumbled. So what was that known world? Just think of it visually. Rajiv Chowk to Kashmiri Gate, vibrant metro stations, large number of people, Bombay Churchgate station, Calcutta Howrah stations. It is the flow of people, airports, shining malls, the market, cinema halls, blockbusters, consumerism, the world that we took for granted. Suddenly that world collapsed. The world collapsed and the world crumbled. And that taken for granted world, when it collapsed, and then we were at a loss. But at that moment of loss, some of us were asking this question, that is it that, that the certain kind of illusion that the age of modernity created, and that age of modernity, certain kind of illusion it created, and we are getting today increasingly disillusioned. That illusion doesn't work. And that illusion was that we are the masters of the world. Modernity gave us reason. Modernity gave us science. Modernity gave us the belief that we can predict our future. We can control our future. We can shape the world. Measurement, prediction, shaping, controlling the world, and we can predict our tomorrow. So that certainty, that the age of certainty that modernity sought to provide. And then we saw that this age of certainty seems to be over. Because we saw that everything is crumbling and collapsing. And we felt that no, we are no longer the masters of this world. The way at one time Siddhartha felt, no matter how much I love this body when I'm young, but ultimately I'll go to the graveyard. I will die. There will be old age. There will be sickness. So it is an illusion that I'm perpetually young, vital. Today's beauty queen will become tomorrow's skeleton. Now this is something, for instance, that it happened to Buddha. Now, at the time of the pandemic, as a collective, we began to see that the world that we took for granted, as if the world would go on like this, with its vitality, with its market, with its consumerism, with its technoscience, with its progress, and with this narcissism of the modern man, that I am the master of the world. The world is essentially, I am the master of the world. I can shape, predict, control the future. And that world crumbled and collapsed in front of us. Airports are empty, stations are empty roads, empty markets, empty offices. Everything seemed to have collapsed. And that caused a lot of anxiety because it was a shock. It was that world suddenly collapsed. And we realized that there are limits to the narcissism of modernity. The thing that happened is that, that we could see that in the age of modernity, death was becoming more and more, which Ivan Illich wrote beautifully in Limits to Medicine. Ivan Illich wrote, that with this, diagnostic imperialism and with this biomedicine and that medical knowledge, we tend to think that one day we'll conquer death, and this urge to be immortal will conquer death. And otherwise, in the age of modernity, we often thought that death is something ugly. Death is something bad. We should not talk about death. We should not talk about death in front of children. We should not discuss the death. And that's why you could see that while educationists often talk about all sorts of education, from skill learning to the academic knowledge to the sex education, but hardly you find a modern educationist who feel the need of death education, talking about death education. Death is a taboo. Death takes place in isolation. And many of us would die eventually in the intensive care unit of a super specialty hospital with all sorts of machines put into our body. So death would be lonely. Death would be in the intensive care unit of a mega hospital with all sorts of machines and the ventilation and all that. So death has become increasingly medicalized, hygienic. It doesn't take place in front of our eyes. It is a taboo. And as a result, the more we seek to separate it from our everyday life, the more there is a fear of death. Because we are not comfortable with death. And as a result, there is a tremendous fear of death. And that fear of death is an implicit thing in the age of modernity. Modernity has not conquered the fear of death. Modernity, in fact, has intensified the fear of death. And that fear of death is manifest itself through the increasing medicalization of human body and through all sorts of mediclaims and the medical insurances. Because we are not comfortable with death. We seek to conquer death or we seek to avoid death. And now, during those months, and even now, right now, that it is so difficult to keep it outside. It is so near now. You open the newspaper, you are just seeing the number. Now, death is so real now. And everybody in our life is saying that it is entering everywhere. Corona-related death, the virus-related death. And not only that, death is becoming a number. Death is becoming a statistics. Death is becoming a number. So long as it is not coming to my house, it is a number. The moment it comes to my house, it is something else. It is something different. So death as a number, death as a statistics, and the fear of death. Now that confronted us, and that led to a new question: what do we do about it? How do we come to terms with this question, with this reality of time and death, which at one time Buddha asked himself in his journey, that when he saw the dead body. Now, we try to avoid this question. We try to remove this question. Now, this is where, for example, that when you go to a mall and when you see with the light and the vitality of the mall, people eating and drinking, and there suddenly at that moment you tend to feel as if there is no death in the world, as if there is no dying in the world, as if it would go on like this, the game would go on like this, that light creates an illusion that it would go on like this. Now, in the life of a collective, the pandemic led to these two important questions, that narcissism of modernity is in crisis, and second, how we deal with the question of death, how we deal with the question of death. That became, another important kind of issue that came to our mind. And the third, which I believe is the most important that came at that time, is that you see that in our age, in our modern life, in the age of technoscience, and through our education, we have all learned the skill of mastering the outer world. As engineers, as doctors, as social scientists, we have learned the technique. Our specialized academic knowledge is about mastering the world out there. So it's like saying that I often crack a joke with my young students. By doing a course on techniques of social research and research methodology, you have mastered the technique of doing a brilliant ethnography of a Trilokpur Islam. But have you learned the art of understanding your own being, your own emotions, your own inner world? Now, this is where, for instance, our education, our specialized academic knowledge, and in this time, in the age of modernity, we are perfect masters of conquering the world out there. So we are engineers, we are doctors, we are specialists, we are social scientists. And as I was saying, that we are reading the books out there, but we are not sufficiently sensitive. We have not sufficiently been trained. We have not been told by our parents, by our educators, by our teacher, that it is also equally important to know the world inside, to read the book inside. So it was like the more we sought to control the world outside, and with our skill and knowledges, more and more we deviated ourselves from the art of knowing the inner world, the inner self. So it was like there was an impoverished inner self. So we do not know what to do with us. And that's why it happened in our homes. Universities closed, schools closed, offices closed during the lockdown. But we are used to a certain clock time, certain modernist notion of time. 6:30 you get up, take bath, take breakfast, rush, take the chartered bus, go to the metro, come to the office, work there, come back, drink, sleep. You were used to that. Now suddenly this timetable collapsed, this timetable crumbled, and our engagement with the outer world stopped. But we are not sufficiently trained to know that what do we do with ourselves then? What do we do with ourselves? After the online classes, what do we do? I can't come to the mall. I can't come to the market. I can't have party with my friend. Then what do I do? What do I do with myself? And as a result, at that time, we feel that how the self is so impoverished, how the inner world has become so impoverished that within 10 days, there is a tremendous sense of boredom haunting us because we can't go out. So there is a tremendous sense of nausea, boredom, anxiety that began to haunt us because we are completely incapable of living with ourselves. We need the stimulation, outside excitements. Now suddenly it has collapsed. And as a result, it caused a lot of anxiety, a lot of boredom. So when you look at these three, the crisis to the narcissism of modernity, the modernist self, and then the second, the issues relating to death, the reality of death. And the third is the impoverished inner self and the inner world. Now, pandemic made us face to face with this, confront with that. The way it happened
in the biography of Buddha at one time, old age, sickness, and death shattered his world. And the new question is taken for granted, world collapsed. And the new questions began to confront. And in the life of collective today, pandemic happened. That's why you as young students, I'm talking to young friends, now just look at it as very reflexive minds. Just think of it. Now see the pandemic beyond masks and sanitizer, beyond hospitalization and vaccination. Just see it beyond that and try to see it, for example, these questions, these existential social questions that confronted you at the time of the pandemic. And because of that, the state in which you and I live today, with tremendous existential insecurity, survival anxiety, fear of death, distancing, boredom, and nervousness, psychic nervousness, anxiety, the boredom, the fear, the uncertainty with which we live today. And when you look at it, the way I was just trying to communicate with you, the crisis of the narcissism of modernity, the impoverished inner world and the self, and the issues of death, then we begin to make sense that how we are located and why we passed through this existential anxiety, uncertainty, insecurity, fear, boredom. Now, once we understand that, then the next question comes, on which just I wish to share with you then, and that is where all of us are searching. Then is there certain kind of meaning we are searching, a meaning that would give certain kind of purpose in our existence, which is therapeutic, which would liberate us from that chronic fear, anxiety, and existential uncertainty we are living today at the time of the pandemic. Is there a quest? Is there a quest? Is there a search beyond vaccination? Is there something much more deeper that you and I are asking and questioning? Now, this is something that we are talking about, we are discussing. Now, just think of it. And I want you to to ask three questions. The first question I want you to see is that, is it possible for you and me, when you strive for searching a meaning at this time, is it possible for you and me, that's my first question, to redefine ourselves? And that redefining ourselves as that, not as conquerors, not as proud modernists willing to conquer, shape, manipulate the world as we wish? Or are we humble wanderers? Isn't it the fact that the pandemic made us realize once again that we are not the masters of the world? We are not conquerors of the world. We are like dust particles. We are like tiny particles in this vast system. And it is an illusion that we are the masters of the world. We are the conquerors of the world. I know it is very difficult to accept it. It is very difficult to accept it because that's like questioning the very narcissism of modernity. We are not the masters of the world. We are like humble wanderers. And the moment we begin to redefine ourselves, not as conquerors, not as masters, but as humble wanderers, something happens to us. And then we begin to realize that when we see ourselves as humble wanderers, then we acknowledge, instead of denying, instead of negating, we acknowledge the inherent uncertainty of life, inherent uncertainty of existence. We cannot control it. We cannot shape it. No matter how many lofty medical insurances you buy, you do not know what is going to happen the next moment. Right now, when you and I are talking, next moment we do not know. Within a second, there can be a massive earthquake in Delhi and everything might collapse. So, acknowledgement of that uncertainty of existence Life is not about that you see the Google and predict that whether this evening there will be rain in Connaught Place. It's not like that. You can predict that whether there will be rains this evening in Connaught Place because you are planning to go out. But when you see the larger thing, it is not as simple as predicting whether there will be rain tomorrow. So this acknowledgement of the uncertainty, the inherent uncertainty of life and existence. 13th March, I was in Bombay last year, Bombay St. Xavier's College. There was a seminar, and at the time of the dinner, some professors were saying that a couple of cases have come in Pune. But Bombay is fine. They took me to the Marine Drive, So Bombay is equally lively, vibrant, and the way the Bombayites say that Bombay never sleeps. And I have never comfortable with that. I believe Bombay should learn to sleep. It's not a good idea that you do not sleep. It should learn to sleep. And then on 15th, I came back to Delhi. And within 7 days, everything changed. Within 7 to 8 days, everything changed. Everything altered. Acknowledgement of this inherent uncertainty of life. Now, when we acknowledge this inherent uncertainty of life, then as a wanderer, then something beautiful happens, and which I just want young minds to reflect in. You and I learn the art of living in the moment. You and I learn the art of living in the present, in the moment. Because this moment, there is only this moment. But most of the time, we live either because of the trauma of yesterday or the anxiety of tomorrow. And we do not live the moment. We do not live in this moment. We do not live in this moment. But right now, possibly you and I are thinking, what happens if tomorrow I get the virus? Nobody knows whether tomorrow you and I will get the virus. But what is important is this very moment right now, when I am seeing all of you, you and I are talking. This moment is the eternal. This moment is real. This moment is intense. This moment is complete. Which Buddhists would often talk about the mindfulness. It is this moment. It is this moment, living in the moment. Because it is an illusion that I can predict my tomorrow. I can predict my future. But it is this moment, and this moment, living this moment intensely, deeply, and meaningfully. And this is possible when instead of being bothered about, being chronically anxiety-ridden about tomorrow, this is where, the question of living the moment. Now, when we acknowledge that uncertainty, learning to live with that inherent uncertainty, and that instead of making us down, gives us now the strength to live with absolute mindfulness at this very moment, in this moment. Now, that is, I think, that one of the important things that I want you to ask, I want you to reflect. And then the second thing that I want you to, the second question that when you search for meaning, I want you to see is that, once again, that when we are talking about death, and the pandemic confront us with this question of the death. Now, just think of it that, is it that, death, instead of being conquered, or the death, instead of this chronic to make it separate, death as a taboo, or death is something that has to be conquered, is it that death is, and this is once again the time, and the pandemic is teaching us, death is not ugly. Death is implicit in the very meaning of living, in the very meaning of life. And just think of it, this is the springtime. When you see an old leaf falling from a tree, how does an old leaf fall from a tree? An old leaf falls from a tree in a rhythmic way. It falls like this. It falls like this. And I often see that the old leaf falling from the tree is like a wonderful Bharatanatyam dance. And the way sunset is no less beautiful than the sunrise. Sunset is equally amazing like the sunrise. And the way the light of the day and the intensity of the darkness of night is equally significant, equally important. And that's why, as I said, that Bombay should learn to sleep. Bombay should learn to be dark. Bombay should learn to be silent. And to enter into darkness, to enter into mother's womb, to enter into the domain of silence, to come back again, is to die and live every moment. It is to die and live every moment. And we were not trained, we were not encouraged, we are not asked to see life like that. We are asked to see that it go on like this until the last moment doctors would try to keep me artificially alive. Uncomfortable with the death. But is death implicit in living itself? And life loses its meaning without death. And to live is to die every moment, and to die is to live intensely every moment. Now this is a question, that I want you to reflect on. And then the third question that I want you to reflect on is this. Is it that, and which we all realize at the time of distancing, is it that, love is our ultimate treasure? Love is the ultimate substance of human existence. Love is our ultimate treasure. Now the pandemic, and especially our isolation, that made us realize it once again so deeply and meaningfully. And what is that love we are talking about? And that love when we are talking about, and that we are talking about much more deeply and meaningfully, is about not the kind of love that Honey Singh talks about. It is something much more deeper that we are talking about. Love as connectedness. Love as an experience of breaking walls of separation. Love as a deep connectedness. And that connectedness is, which a very great Buddhist Vietnamese monk often speaks of it very beautifully. He says that it's like saying that you take some grain in your hand, and when you meditate on the grain in your hand, you see that you immediately begin to see the dark clouds and the monsoon. Because there are dark clouds and the monsoon showers, and there are rains. And then you begin to see there are certain farmers who are harvesting it. And then you begin to see that some person in a lorry brought those grain to the local market. And then someone from the local market took it to your grocery shop, and you took it. In other words, in that handful of grain, you see clouds, you see monsoon showers, you see the farmer who is cultivating, you see the lorry driver who brought it. In other words, which William Blake would say, that handful of sand, and you see eternity into it. So this is, you are seeing that connected. You are connected with everything. You are not insulated. You are not separated. You are not an atomized, insulated consumer, which market wants you to do. You are essentially connected. You are connected with everything. And this is where it is said, that in one of Albert Camus' novels, the character lived a very meaningless kind of existence, the existentialist preoccupation with the absurd. And he would be sentenced to death. And he is in the prison. And one day he's sleeping in the prison cell, and suddenly he saw a ray of sun ray striking his forehead. And then he immediately realizes that I have never felt it so intensely. I have never felt it so intensely, and I have begun to live for the first time so deeply and meaningfully as the sun ray strikes my forehead. Because I am the sun, and the sun is the me. I am not separated from the sun. So this interconnectedness, and when you see this interconnectedness, then the question arises, then what is it that is dying? Isn't it that, for example, the water that I see just now doesn't exist after some time, but has it disappeared or has it altered its form? Has it become the cloud? Or is it that the flower that I saw and then the flower fell and I no longer see that flower? Is there something death or is there birth and death? These are just two doors through which the existence is constantly playing its game. Now that's the question, which they would ask, which the Buddhist would ask. Now, is it something, for example, we do realize today at this moment of the pandemic much more intensely with our introspection that love in terms of the connectedness is the ultimate treasure. Love is the ultimate healer, that sense of connected. Love is more powerful than the vaccine. Now, is it, for example, something that we are realizing? Now, when I ask you to reflect on that with these three questions, then possibly another quest emerges, another quest for a meaning of existence emerges. And there, before I converse with you, I'm just in that, does it also lead to another kind of prayer? Prayers have disappeared from our life, in the age of consumerism and, because, as people like Eric Fromm and Herbert Marcuse would say, that we begin to see the sacred in our new mobile or in our new car, or the new utensils that we buy. We do not see it anything because we see we are consumers today. Or certain kind of prayers that the priestcraft generates, or which, many of these religious babas generate, that every Tuesday go to Hanuman temple or worship the Saturn and your daughter will get married or your son will get a job. I am talking about another kind of prayer, not this prayer. Now, whether there is a need, whether the prayers make the life, give a new meaning to life, and what is that prayer? And one of this fantastic prayer, what Rabindranath Tagore articulated in one of his poems and also the song, that demolish my ego, demolish all my egotistic illusion, demolish my narcissism. Because we are saying that we are not the masterers, we are the humble wanderers, we are not the conquerors. So demolition of the ego. And isn't it that at the time of the pandemic, we realize that the illusion of power and privilege is a myth, because it enters everywhere, from Donald Trump to Amit Shah, from Amitabh Bachchan to Boris Johnson. It enters everywhere. It enters everywhere. It is not limited to Dharbi slum in Mumbai. It enters everywhere. And is it the time that, in a very paradoxical way, pandemic is also teaching us that this notion of self-narcissism, is illusion, is a myth, And this is where, is it the time to have that prayer that demolish my ego? Demolish my ego. I am just a humble wanderer, and my salvation lies in interconnectedness. Can we have that prayer in our life? A prayer that makes life much more sublime, much more meaningful at this moment of difficulty? Or is it that we would take the vaccine, second dose, next 2 weeks we'd wait, and then life would go on like this, with the same consumerism, with the same technologies of surveillance, and with the same inequality that we saw that when the migrant workers walked miles after miles, with the same reckless economic exploitation, ecological violence, technological destruction, and the ugliness of power. Whether we would keep engaging what we have been doing, or whether we would learn something meaningful. If our generation doesn't learn anything, we are finished. But it is the young faces, and you saw it, and you are growing and you are evolving. Possibly it is your time to teach our generation, because we have given you a very ugly world. We have given you a very, very ugly world. We have betrayed you. We have cheated you. And now, for example, it is your turn. And at times, these difficulties could do two things. Either we could be completely broken, or we could transform these difficulties into opportunities of new learning, new prayer, new understanding, new mode of relationship, new way of defining ourselves. And that is something that our generation will be waiting from you, from this young generation. And that is the way I would just end. And now you can ask me, you can let's listen to one another. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the extremely interesting and informative lecture. I'm sure the audience would have started thinking when you said that how we were good at mastering the outer world and not actually reflect into our inner world. The beneficial insights that you gave to support our go-to mantra for today, that is living in the moment, would surely have helped everyone. The way you presented the other side of the thought, that was quite interesting of during the pandemic. Thank you, sir, for such an interesting and thought-provoking words. The floor is now open to questions. We request all the participants to either put their questions in the chat box or their names. We will either call out your names or questions from the chat box itself. So the first question we have is from Surbhi. Surbhi, you can unmute yourself and ask sir the question. I think so there is some problem with the connection. I'll proceed with the next question. So the next question is by Sharmi Ghotkila from the YouTube live stream. She asked that how can we love the others when they hurt us and people we love? How can we realize the connectedness with them?
Sir, you are on mute.
Please repeat the question.
Yes, sir. So she asked that how can we love the others when they hurt us and people we love? How can we realize the connectedness with them?
Yeah. It's a very difficult question. It's not that I have a ready-made answer to this question. Possibly we are all in a search, in a quest. We are co-travelers. We are undertaking a journey together. And I see that this question is very genuine. We all realize. Only thing I would suggest is that quite often in our life, you must have seen it happens that when you become angry with somebody, for some reason, and you might have a genuine reason to be angry, you grow immensely angry, you lose temper, and you use some words. Then if you're a sensitive person, then you realize that the person you were angry with, you do not know what happened to him. But one thing you are sure, that that day is completely destroyed. You do not find any joy in that day. Again and again, you ask yourself, I lose my temper and I'm not feeling good. Why did I lose my temper? Why I fell into the same trap? He provoked me. he used a lot of bad words, or he damaged. And I fell into the same trap, and he becomes eventually successful. His hatred becomes successful. I destroyed my day by becoming, by imitating him. So I lost myself that day. Now, these were the moments possibly then we realized, not through book, not because someone taught us, but through our own experience, that when we hate someone, when we hurt someone, we become angry, even for supposedly genuine reasons, it is something, that we cause a lot of damage to ourselves. Art of resistance is one thing, and hatred and abusing other is quite another. If there is an injustice, you resist. You resist. So the art of resistance is very nuanced. It is not, for instance, like what we see these days, abuses, hatred, all sorts of violence and things of that kind. So this is something, that I would suggest. It is a constant search. It is a constant quest. And the more we see the interconnectedness, then it becomes easier for us that it's like saying, and with that introspection we say that is it that inside me there is a Hitler, and inside me there is also a Gautam Buddha, and the more I begin to look at myself, and then possibly, that I become much more humble, I become much more compassionate, because I have not yet succeeded in eradicating the Hitler inside me, and it is, that this is where, a process of inner churning, a process of inner quest, a process of self-purification goes on. And it's a process. It's a process of becoming. It is not something that is something ready-made. That is what I would say. Yes.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful answer. The next question we have is from Sarah Heather. Her question is that the new attitude towards death, one without any fear, is a great one. But isn't it the very fear of death that has helped us to control the pandemic to a large extent?
You see that it's a good question, but we should not confuse two things. Is that when we are saying that death is implicit in life, that the old leaf would fall from the tree. It is implicit because the new leaf would come. That does not mean that you just climb a tree and just, and destroy all the leaves, because one day they would fall. So committing suicide is one thing, and learning to live with the rhythm of life and death is quite another. That we should not make that confusion. So when I'm saying that death is implicit in living, death is as natural as life. Sunset is as normal as the sunrise. That does not mean that when there is a sunrise, I do not celebrate sunrise. Or in the daytime, I do not work. What it means is that when there is sunset, I equally embrace it. I cannot avoid it. I equally embrace it. I celebrate it. The way we celebrate deep sleep. Because we all want that deep sleep and the dreamless deep sleep, which is very rare. It's almost like death, and the way we celebrate immense vitality, which we are doing right now. We are talking, debating, discussing with a lot of life energy. Similarly, we would celebrate a very deep, silent, intense sleep and the darkness of night, So this is what I'm talking about. So it's not about that, you won't take vaccine. It is not about that you won't take care of yourself. It is not that hospitals would not hire ventilators or the oxygen. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that that how existential we look at the question of death. If not Corona, tomorrow it could be someone else. Na? There is no guarantee that if there is a vaccination, the cancer would not come, or something else would not come. You and I will die. It can be 80 years, it can be 85 years, it can be 150 years, but one day we'll die. We have to die.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So the next question is from Surbhi. Surbhi, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
I think Surbhi got logged out.
Yeah, I just saw Surbhi logging out. Maybe some network issue. You can take the other question, Vanshika, and then let Surbhi join in.
Yes, ma'am. I'll just go ahead with the next question. So the next question is from Reet. Her question is how to practice mindfulness in such uncertain times.
I don't, that these are the questions, which cannot be answered in a way. If you ask the question, how many suicide do you can talk about? There are defined answers to this question, but this is like about each of us experiences it, learns, unlearns it in our own way. Only thing that I would say is that possibly it's a good idea in our life to try to practice this. This is what it is an exceedingly difficult. Many great things are difficult. Many great things are difficult to do, but it's a great idea to see its importance and to try to practice. And just I'll give you the illustration that that suppose in a winter morning you've just got up and you have come to your balcony and you just see the sun rising and the warmth of the sun is touching your body. That moment is so intense. That moment is so beautiful. That moment is so sacred. And to observe that moment deeply, intensely, meaningfully, and to live in that moment. And as it would be said, the divine is that moment only. Heaven is that moment only. There is no other heaven. God is not in the temple, and certainly not in Akshardham temple or the Ram temple. It is here. It is here in this moment. If you and I are talking, and at that moment we are completely merged with the talking, that is the divine. That is the moment. And at that moment, the dancer becomes dance. There is no separation between the dancer and the dance. The teacher becomes teaching. There is no separation between the teacher and the teaching at our highest moment of inspiration. Because then we live deeply and intensely at that moment. So this is, I think, that our everyday practice, our understanding, everyday practice, it's a process that you and I, if we strive for, if we try, we might come closer to it. That is what I would say.
Thank you, sir, for such an wholesome answer. The next question is by Antara Karan Sharma.
Surbhi has joined back.
Okay, ma'am. Surbhi, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
So good morning, sir. Thank you so much for giving such a wonderful lecture. My question is that, as you know, that during the time of pandemic, it's very sometimes I feel that life is going against us, and so there are so many negative situations. Finances are getting affected, and even I also had an emotional loss during this pandemic. I lost someone from my family. So it's very difficult for me to cope up. So can you just tell me some strategies? What is where I can that what is the right way of thinking? How can we gain positivity in these negative situations?
Thank you. That your question is our questions, is everybody's question. That's why, as I beginning said, that art of listening, we are talking to one another. It is not that, like you, I am asking the same question. Collectively, we are trying to learn and unlearn, and we are trying to see, we are trying to go deeper. And that's why your question is very important and significant, because it is everybody's question. It is my question too. Now, I think that there is something that we ought to feel and think about, see things, when we see things in totality, then we see beyond even the dichotomy of positive and negative. Positive and negative is also at times a mental orientation. See life in its totality. When you see life in its totality, as I am saying, that the boundless laughter of the baby and the child, the innocence of the child, and then the curiosity of the adolescent, the vitality of the young, worldly anxiety of the middle-aged man, or the wisdom of an old man with a frail body. All are equally real. All are equally real. The way the new leaf coming in the tree is as real as the old leaf falling from the tree. There is no positive, there is no negative. This is the totality of life. It is our mental orientation that sees death as negative and the birth of the newborn as positive. But every moment, now go to a hospital and in the early morning take a statistics, how many babies are born in the hospital and how many people died in the hospital. So it's simultaneously happening. It is our mental orientation that sees certain things as negative, sees certain things as positive. But it is a totality of life. It is a totality of life. And when you and I, acknowledge this totality of the life in its totality, then possibly something else begins to happen in us, begin to happen to our life. Then possibly we become relatively more mature to come to terms with what you regard as negative. That negative, instead of paralyzing us, it, makes us capable of seeing it, pass through it. And likewise, what you are calling positive, that positive, instead of making us excessively, illusory by thinking that this positive will go on forever, we also begin to see it. It is also like the waves and the tides, comes and disappears, comes and disappears, So it's like you are seeing in front of the sea, in front of the ocean, you are seeing a huge tide. And the tide is very real, but at the same time it is unreal. It comes, it touches the shore, and then it breaks into pieces. So wave is incomplete without water, and sea is incomplete without the wave. And this is where the temporal and the eternal are deeply integrated. The finite and the infinite are integrated. These are not separated. These are not insulated. These are not different. And that's why when you see it, then we begin to see it in its totality, in its comprehensive way. But we have been asked, we have been trained, as in the beginning I said, because of a very, very modernist notion that we are the conquerors, we are the masters, we can conquer, we can shape, we can conquer death, and death is ugly. And that's why, for example, this notion comes, this notion haunts us. Now, this is where I would ask you to see beyond positive and negative, but to see it as the totality of life, totality of existence.
Thank you so much, sir. That really answered my question.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful answer. The next question we have is from Antara. The question is that in a world with such immense political polarization, information overload and race for productivity is there. How can we stay sane or content in the crossfire of opinions?
Oh, lovely question. Yes. Again, thank you very much, because this is a collective question. This is your question, my question. I also ask myself a similar question. You know that there are certain things. Your question is a very relevant question, and it makes me see that one is that sometimes you see that what we often celebrate as information revolution, and there are moments when you tend to feel that it is an information pollution. You know, at times, what we often regard as information revolution, it looks like an information pollution. And constant bombardment through all these channels of communication, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, television, newspaper, you know, constant bombardment of this thing. And as a result, what happens is that we are consuming so much of information and news as consumers. As in the beginning, you says that we read so many books outside that we fail to read the book that you and I are. We are consuming so much of information that as a result, outside information, you know, which news is getting viral, who said what, all those things, that we fail to hear the vibrations, the inner vibrations. You know, it's like asking that, you know, that if I ask some of you that what was the last time when you saw the full moon? You know, it might be difficult for you and me to recall that whether it was on the occasion of the last full moon or the last year I saw it. You know, what was the last time you and I saw the sunrise? So we have missed it. We have missed it. You know, what was the last time when in your balcony you just saw a tiny blue flower has bloomed, has grown? But you and I know that what is the latest tweet of Kangana Ranaut? You know, what she has said. You and I know that. You know, so this is something where constantly a process of filtering is needed. And certain kind of inner churning and the courage is needed, and that wisdom, you know, to realize that what is trivial, what is unnecessary, what is toxic, what is meaningless, from what is important, from what is vital, from what is meaningful, from what is aesthetically enriching. That, I think, is also one aspect of studentship, one aspect of knowing and learning. And your generation, because you are living amid so much information pollution, the task becomes excessively important. And then the second thing in the question is about the toxic politics, the toxic culture around us, you know, in such an age, how we live our sanity. And, you know, living our sanity, it is an extremely difficult task, but I think that it is also depends, you know, for example, how we prioritize our existence, prioritize our life, how we begin to see meaning in life. For example, that is it necessary for me that even every evening, even if you are a politically correct person, that is it necessary for you that every evening, by compulsion, you have to watch NDTV or Ravish Kumar? Is it possible that there are moments when you switch off television channel, when you switch off your mobile, and you do something else? you do something else, and you come to your bookshelf and you suddenly discover a lovely Panchatantra story, which is there in your bookshelf that your grandfather gifted you when you first went to school. And you just begin to take that book, and now you have grown up. You have seen world, and suddenly you begin to see a lot of meaning in that Panchatantra story, which you read, which at that time, you read it as joy, as fun. And now you are saying behind it, there is so much deep meaning, and why these stories recur again and again, And then you chose not to watch Ravish Kumar, not to watch a television channel, not to check your latest, email, to do that. Now, these are the things which again and again we have to re-educate ourselves. We have to orient ourselves, and we have to say no to otherwise what appears to be tempting. This compulsive urge for performance, this compulsive urge to be up to date, this compulsive urge not to miss anything viral, Because what is viral is temporal. Viral fever is for 5 days, but viral news for 1 hour, So why to bother so much about it, It has no longevity, So, but something deep, something meaningful, something substantial, do we search for that? Do you quest? Imagine a day when your mobile is switched off for the entire day. And possibly that day, suddenly you realize after long, long days, for the first time, you have heard the vibrations of your heart. Every moment is happening, but we have not heard it. We have only heard the mobile ring. For the first time in your life, I'm hearing it. You are rediscovering life. So all those small experiments we have to make in our life. So it's a long journey. But with all those small, meaningful, beautiful experiments we have to do to find some meaning in this insane world. Yes.
Thank you, sir, for such a fascinating answer. It might have completely boggled the audience. The next question is from the YouTube live stream by Pranta Patnaik. The question is that, can we say that in order to understand the existence, we need to move away from the structure agency debate or an intense engagement with it? This comes as a question because the social structure is so dominating that we are compelled to act in a particular manner.
Okay. The person seems to have read a lot of Pierre Bourdieu and Anthony Giddens, and that the structure and agency. Let me come into first the sociology and then come to the later part. I think that it's a very important question now, especially Anthony Giddens in the New Rules of Sociological Method. When he talks about structuration as a process, and structuration as a process where he talks about the duality of structures. Structures are constraining and structures are enabling. It's like saying that if I say that nice A is Aditi person, it makes no sense. I have to say Aditi is a nice person. Because I am bound by the grammar of English language. Aditi is a nice person. I don't have the freedom to say nice person Aditi A is. So when I utter a sentence, verbalize, communicate, Aditi is a nice person, I am bounded by the structure of the English grammar. It constrains me. But does it only constrain me? It also enables me. And it enables me in that way. When I say, for example, that every inch of space is a miracle. This is American poet Walt Whitman. It is a grammatically correct sentence, But it is not just a grammatically correct sentence. It's a wonderful revelation. It's a poetic wisdom. To me, every inch of space is a miracle. The fish that swims is a miracle. The leaf that falls from the tree is a miracle. The mountain that I see is a miracle. So it's a poetic revelation. It is the language that makes that poetry possible. So it is now enabling. So in our life also, as Giddens would say, though we are bounded by history, by the network of social relationships, by the institutions and the organization, but at the same time, we are not puppets. We are not robotic performers. It is also possible for us to work on that, to experiment with that, to innovate that. And it is this creative interplay between agency and structure leads to the process of structuration. Structures are constantly defined, redefined, modulated, amended, altered through human practices. And human practices also do not take place in void, in isolation. The way when I utter a word, it follows certain grammar of the language. So in life, it happens. Now, when you read a people like George Herbert Mead, and when Mead talks about me and I, Mead would say that there are extraordinary personalities who have a high degree of I. Me is very structured, institutionalized, organized. Me is my societal me, but I is a creative response. There is a creative surplus in I. So Jesus, Buddha, Gandhi, others, they were endowed with a high degree of creativity, creative I. So I think that life is a constant play, constant interplay of agency and the structure, me and the I. Now, this is where I think that the first question, the first part of the question comes. And the second, I think that at this time, and this is essentially what we are trying to see, that our quest, the quest that I am talking about, we are talking about, reflecting on, the quest for meaning, the urge to redefine life, the urge to understand the kind of questions that the pandemic has posed before us, and the urge to redefine life, it also comes from that human creativity, that human search, that human quest, that how we find a meaning, how we find a new way of living, even at a time when things are not normal, when the taken for granted world has collapsed, when everything is upside down. So this is where, for example, that constant play of agency and structure going on in our life.
Thank you, sir, for such an interesting answer. The next question is from Akshita Parikh. Her question is, at a time when the technology is continuously progressing and achieving new feats every day, it fosters the illusion that we as humans can and are mastering the world. So how do we fight the narcissism of modernity at this intersection with our realizations?
I think that one simple way of doing it is that, I'll just give you an illustration to make you think that in a normal day, when everything is active, when you come to Kashmiri Gate metro station, and you just see that the trains are coming and people are getting down in large numbers, and then just come to the elevator and they are taking it from this platform to the another. When you deeply contemplate, look at it, little from distance, then you just see that you are like the luggage, you are like the raw cement, which the lorry and other things carry from one place to another. Now, these huge, gigantic machines, people are coming, taking you and throwing you there, from this gate to that gate, from this platform to platform. And imagine, in the late 19th century, the book Metropolis and Mental Life, which George Simmel wrote, heartless indifference he talks about in the metropolis, in the cities. Now, how many times do you recall when you take, for example, from Rajiv Chowk and you would get down at the university stoppage, the university, and when you get down, how many times it has happened that you could remember the face of a person who sat in front of you or who stood in front of you? You can't remember because we are all faceless abstract entities today. We are all faceless abstract entities. No matter, at that time, I might have sent email to 100 friends. In my YouTube, I might have sent something. But suddenly that question comes that, do I recall any face? Or has anybody recalled my face? Then suddenly that notion of anonymity and the abstraction comes. And then it's like saying that suddenly there is an accident in the street of Delhi and you have 1 million Facebook subscribers, but there is nobody to take you to the AIIMS Trauma Center. There is nobody. Ultimately, an ambulance comes and the cops come take you there. I think suddenly you realize that on the screen, what does it mean? On the screen, what does it mean that 1 million subscribers? Techno hallucination is the worst form of superstition that neoliberal techno-global capitalism has created. It's more dangerous than the superstition when the traditional astrologer says and tells you at the age of 22 you will get married and you will have a good husband. This is much more dangerous, I tend to feel. Is a much more dangerous superstition sanctified in the name of technoscience. And I believe that we have succeeded to a large extent in fighting the old astrologers. But now the real challenge has come to find the new black magicians. And these new black magicians are the techno managers of the corporate world. They're the new black magicians. And that black magic manifests itself through the seductive logic of techno hallucination and consumerism. It looks slick, So domination looks seductive. So domination has become seduction. And that's why it is much more threatening. It is much more dangerous. It is pleasant. It looks pleasant, but it is domination. It is control. So that is what I would suggest.
Thank you, sir, for such a helpful answer. The next question is again from the YouTube live stream and is asked by Mr. Shwarya Sharma. The question is that is it the time that we make our new generation get back to Gita to understand life and behavior, to get a clarity which is completely unclear, in order to also accept death in life?
It's a lovely. It's a very good question. I think that it's not just about the Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, Sufi mysticism, Buddhism, Jain, lot of things, together with Marxism, existentialism, all those things. All those are, be it Marx, be it Buddha, be it Zygmunt Bauman, Herbert Marcuse, be it Kabir. And now I think that as learners, as young minds, as students, it is always a great idea. It is always a lovely idea to explore, to walk with this spectrum of possibilities. And that's why all of you are young students. I often ask my JNU students that I would like to see in your bookshelf Karl Marx's Das Kapital and economic and philosophic manuscripts, and as well as, for example, a book on Kabir, or a book on Jain Buddhism, and as well as, for example, Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus, because this is the time to grow, to evolve, to see multiple ways great philosophers, thinkers have looked at the world. There is no contradiction. So it's not that I love Marx and hence I should not read Gita. I only limit myself. Nobody suffers. I only suffer. I close my mind. I am too young. I have already closed the window of my consciousness. I believe that Marx should give me all answers, so I would not read Gita or I would not read Buddhism. Or I read Gandhi and hence I would not read Ambedkar. Then again I close my options. All have their tremendous insights. As a learner, my task is to work with them, to keep my eyes open, with the awakened intelligence, with the windows of my consciousness open, to work with them, to learn, unlearn, to evolve. So it's a journey. So that's why not Gita? And especially the question, which is very important about the thing about the Gita, as you have asked, that one point that I would just say is about, take it in that fashion, that who is Arjuna and who is Krishna? Now, if we ask this question deeply, then at one moment, we possibly realize that Arjuna and Krishna is you and me. In our Kurukshetra is not just outside physical space. Kurukshetra is the turbulent inner space. Arjuna is my egoistic self, troubled, burdened, anxiety-ridden about success and failure. What would happen? And Krishna is my inner counselor. Krishna is my conscience. And I'm talking to myself in a dilemma that, and Arjuna's question, now you are asking in a different way, whether to write UPSC or whether to write GRE. Whether to get married as parents are pressurizing, or whether to influence parents not to be in a hurry and to complete my study. Whether to take up this job which gives me a lot of salary, or whether to postpone it and to continue my PhD. Now all sorts of questions we are constantly asking ourselves, and burdened, troubled. And it is at that juncture you see the conversation and the dialogue between the Arjuna and Krishna. So Kurukshetra is a metaphorical illustration. The war is a turbulent site, turbulent consciousness. Between now two forces, the immediate impulsive temptation, the desire, and another is the lightness, death. So Krishna and Arjuna simultaneously existing within me and conversing with each other. And we are in that process of inner chanting. So, and that's why it is so important, to come to think of it. And that's why, that together with these, when you look at, read The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, and when Camus invokes, Sisyphus, and then Sisyphus is condemned to carry that heavy stone and to keep it at the top of the cliff. And the moment he keeps it, it rolls, it falls. And again he does it, and he has been doing it for ages. Now a question comes, is it what you and I have been doing? Morning, getting up, taking breakfast, going to office, coming back, drinking, sleeping, again going, doing the same alienated work, came back. As it is said that Monday you are born, Tuesday you are complete education, Wednesday you get job, Thursday your child is born, Friday your child get married, Saturday you feel sick, and Sunday you die. Is it going on like this? And then the question of absurdity haunts us. And then how we cope with that absurdity. And that was the Camus question. Do we commit suicide? Or should we imagine Sisyphus happy? Now, these are, that's why I think your young learner, be it the myth of Sisyphus, be it Bhagavad Gita, be it a Sufi tale, all are important. All are important in our life. We should not close the windows of our consciousness.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is by Dr. Nivedita Ghosh, the teacher in charge of the department.
Yes.
Sorry, I will not be able to put my video on, otherwise you will get to see my son jumping around. So my question is, thank you for the talk. It has been so transformative, I would say. My question, sir, is what does one do when one has found meaning and can no longer go back to meaninglessness? How does one deal with the meaningless? That's it.
Okay. First, Nivedita, thank you. My best wishes and love for your child. And it's a great moment. Your child is jumping. That's the moment, that's the moment, and that enjoy and celebrate that moment intensely, meaningfully, deeply. And that is mindful. That is real mindfulness, and it is so lovely. And second is that I think I don't know. This is, as I say, that all your questions are my questions, my anxiety. I think that I would just respond to your question in that way. And I'm sure you have read it in many stories and many occasions, and it repeat. It is about a Buddhist master, and he lives in a very non-assuming living, but a man with great wisdom in a village. And the villagers often see him that morning he gets up, he goes to the paddy field, he does agriculture, he comes back, he goes to the market, buy vegetable, cooks. Then one day, one villager asked that a lot of people say that you are a very enlightened person. You are a person with a lot of wisdom, an enlightened person. But it doesn't look like you do everything that we do. We also go to the field, do agriculture, you go to the market, buy onion and potato and cook and sleep. You are also doing the same thing. Now he said that you are absolutely right, but possibly only thing I do all this thing. Earlier I used to do it without mindfulness, without awakened intelligence. Now I do it with absolute mindfulness. So when I do agriculture, I do agriculture. I do not think of anything else. I'm completely into it. When I go to the market, I'm in the market. I'm into it. And when I take a cup of tea, I am the tea. So it now acquires what appeared to be ordinary, that has now become enchanted. That has acquired now a completely new meaning. And that is like the glimpses of the extraordinary in the mundane, glimpses of the extraordinary in the ordinary. Or what Rabindranath Tagore would say, that I see the infinite in the finite. So that is what I tend to feel.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I think, Vanshika, we can take few more questions, 1-2 more questions, and then we can wind up. Sir must be also tired.
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Afternoon, I have another lecture, Bangalore Christ College.
Yes, sir. I came to know about it. Suparna texted me yesterday. I know. So 2 more questions, Vanshika, sir, then we'll wind up.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Sure. So the next question is from Mansi Bhalerao from the YouTube live stream. Her question is that how do you suggest we approach this quest for inner reflexivity?
What is the question?
So her question is that how do we approach the quest for inner reflexivity?
Yeah, Manshi, that was something we were talking about, we were reflecting on. But only thing that I would add is that, there is possibly two things which I believe is very important to separate. One is an instrumental intelligence, instrumental reasoning, logic, which is, for example, which is a very instrumental goal for achieving something, for dominating something, for conquering something. Say, for example, which Francis Bacon would say that the knowledge is power, that I objectify the nature, and the more I objectify it, the more I succeed in shaping and manipulating the nature, in establishing human supremacy over nature. The knowledge is power. It's very instrumental. Now, another thing is that an awakened intelligence. An awakened intelligence is not instrumental intelligence. Awakened intelligence is that it's more like a light of illumination. It is more like a light of illumination. And with that light of illumination, then what happens? Then when you look at, for example, a tree, then you just don't see a tree merely as the resource for the furniture or the resource for the newsprint. You also begin to see tree also in a different light, in a non-Baconian way, and that becomes an awakened intelligence. It is not just instrumental. And then a relationship begins to evolve between you and the tree. It's not the relationship between the contractor and the tree, the forest contractor and the tree. For the forest contractor, the tree has to be cut because the furniture has to be supplied to your and my house. But for someone who is engaging with the tree in a non-Baconian way, non-instrumental way, a relationship begins to evolve with the tree. Now, I think that is where a question of an awakened intelligence comes and a relational self evolves. The separation between the knower and the known gets minimized. And this is where a lot of inner churning and the reflexivity begins to take place. And the empathy, understanding, ethics of care, art of listening, these faculties are cultivated in our consciousness, in our being. This is what I try to say.
Thank you, sir, for such a wholesome answer. The next question we have is from Sneha Rajput. Her question is, during lockdown, we all felt different emotions in extremity, especially when the family was tested positive. So it became difficult to deal with it on a daily basis, not only during that particular period, but in general. So how can one remain calm in such situations or in general?
I know. I completely empathize with this question because it is so real. It is so real. I know it is an exceedingly, it is the most difficult task when it comes very near, when it comes very close. It's an exceedingly difficult task. And I tend to believe that there is no way one can say that it is not difficult. It is an exceedingly difficult task, and it is very important to understand that. Only thing that I would say that also in our life, it happens that there are moments when everything looks that everything is going in an opposite direction, and everything, there is a turmoil. Also, it happens in our life, those moments of turmoil, those moments of breakdown. At times, also those moments take you to a new light. take you to a new understanding of life and the world. And that's why there are many who would also say that it is serious illness, serious disease that altered the worldview of many people. They passed through it, they became less arrogant, they became more empathic, they became more sensitive, they became more compassionate, because they realized, the fragile character of the human body, and as a result, they became more empathic, sensitive. So it is a very paradoxical thing. At the extreme moment of difficulty, we lose calmness, we become afraid, we lose our temper, we become anxiety-ridden. But also it happens that those are also the moments when we gain something, acquire something, which under so-called normal circumstances we often miss. We often miss, we often fail to see. So that is the way I would just try to respond to it.
Thank you, sir, for such a fascinating and yet helpful answer. I think so that would be all for today's question answer session. I would like to thank you for joining us today and delivering such an enriching and interesting talk and answering all the questions that we asked. It was our privilege to have you here with us, sir. I would also like to thank our principal, Dr. Sandra Joseph, for giving the department the opportunity to host this talk. I would like to thank all the faculty members. This would not have been possible without your guidance. And thank you all for being such an attentive audience. I would also like to thank Gaurav sir for all the technical assistance he provided us with. Last but not the least, this year, Carpe Diem features of 3 competitions: a photography competition in the theme Seeing the Unseen, Zahir, the Blackout Poetry Competition, and a comic strip making competition on the topic Pandemic and Self. We thank all the past participants for their enthusiastic response. The results for all the competitions will be announced on the Instagram handle of the department today itself, so stay tuned. Thank you, everyone. I request...
Vanshika, we would request sir just to stay for 1 more minute, sir. Some students are requesting to take a photograph, a screen photograph, since